have to talk about IPO environment for Netto, but still fairly young company, so we'll talk about commercial insurance instead. But yeah, insurance, obviously, it quietly underpins almost everything in the economy, but very few people see what actually happens in the engine room. So today, we will talk about one of the key levers in that engine room, and that is how we assess risk and how AI is changing that. I'm joined by Jack Miller here, who's the CEO and co-founder of Netto, an AI platform for risk assessment for commercial insurance. And Netto helps carriers cut down month-long backlogs for risk assessment and make that into, I would say, almost same-day decisions. But Jack, you spent 7 years at McKinsey and Quantum Black, and you advised global insurers. And what was the moment when you decided, actually, I'm going to go and build this myself?
Yeah, so I mean, I spent around 6 or 7 years in McKinsey working on the cross-section of advanced analytics and insurance. And I feel like I was part of that wave where insurance companies were first starting to realize the power of machine learning with all of the data sets that they had. That was particularly focused on personal lines. So, if you or I go and get car insurance or home insurance, the reason it's so quick and from the perspective of the insurance company so accurate is because you have started to see machine learning build off historical data. And I always find that very interesting. But it felt like, in the same way that was a kind of tidal shift for the industry, there was a brand new one in LLMs and how they're able to build structured data from unstructured evidence. So it felt like this was going to be even more seismic. And working in a consultancy, we were always advising clients to try and build solutions, but really this felt like more of a software play. So it felt like something that needed to come from outside into the industry to solve effectively. And plus there was a huge kind of pain point, particularly in commercial lines where we're focused today, about the inefficiencies and the slowness of how that industry behaves. It felt like too good of an opportunity to kind of let pass by the sidelines.
Yeah, and you went for a really specific part of the value chain. You went for, I would say, risk engineering was the first wedge.
Yep.
Why?
Well, I think, probably not the sexiest dinner party topic. I think when you break it down into its fundamental parts, like what is an insurance company? It is a company that specializes in looking at real-world items, assets, things, and effectively putting a hand up and saying, I'm going to price that risk and I'm going to make a decision on it, and the liability rests with me. So if you're interested in all of the frontier elements of generative AI and LLMs and essentially how they interpret images, video, audio, documents, then this is a really fertile ground for that application. It didn't feel like shoehorning AI into an industry. It felt like the perfect timing for an industry that needs this and the technology that was suddenly available.
Yeah. So I guess we're getting decision-grade data really out of the real world.
Yep. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Maybe to frame the market and the problem a little bit more that we're going after with Netto, because someone outside of insurance, it can sound very specific. When you explain Netto to people, what's the usual reaction and how do you make people understand kind of the magnitude of this market?
Yeah, so commercial lines, annually, it's about $1 trillion in premium, so a huge kind of behemoth oil tanker of an industry that is slow moving. And it is extremely relationship-based and manual. And I think that's the key difference from personal lines to commercial lines. So very data-driven, scientific underwriting on personal lines, but it's much more the art of underwriting on commercial lines. It's based on your experience and the people you know. And what you've seen in the past. But fundamentally, when you break down this step, an insurance company sends people to visit sites to build up that subjective opinion of how risky an asset is. So that can be an oil rig, in the North Sea. It can be a factory building somewhere else in the world, or a brand new airport, for example. And that process today takes about 3 weeks to get your answer back. We believe this technology now can help it move at the speed of personal lines, and you get a decision instantly.
It's really cool. So I guess maybe thinking about these risk assessments almost like the front door to which complex risk that insurers are able to actually take on.
Exactly. We position ourselves as the eyes of commercial insurance, right? Anywhere where you need to look at the real world and turn that into structured data to make a decision, Nettle is the infrastructure that allows that.
Let's make it concrete for the people listening.
Yes.
What does a typical day look like in the life of a risk engineer or an underwriter that you work with?
I'll give you the before and after.
Ooh.
So, I mean, the before is a broker has a risk. They ring up or email an underwriter and say, hey, I think this fits your risk appetite. Here's some information about it. And then suddenly there's an alarm bell in the insurance company, and it says, actually, over this value, we've hit a threshold, or hey, we've had some problems with underwriting paper manufacturing sites in the past because there's heavily flammable warehouses. So you're going to have to send one of the risk engineers to go visit. That risk engineer will do their research. They'll maybe look at old reports. They'll maybe contact others in the team and build an ingoing hypothesis of the risk. They'll visit the site. They'll speak with the client, do a tour of the site, and then they'll come home and write anywhere from 90 to 300-page report, intensely over-engineered. And then finally, the underwriter has been badgering them for weeks, and they get the report on their desk, and they're probably ready to underwrite it, but maybe the client has now gone with another insurer. So that's the bottleneck and the pain point. The idea with Nettle is, as soon as you receive that submission, Nettle has agentic AI pre-programmed to go and do the research for you, build up that initial perspective, and then when you go on site, you just take out your mobile phone, take videos, talk about what you see, take images, maybe scan some documents. By the time you finish that site visit, you can confidently tell the client, you're going to get insurance, here's likely the price of this, because all of this data has flown back to the underwriter and passed through their checks.
And these experts are quite scarce experts in short supply as well. I think we've spoken you and I have spoken a lot about kind of the demographic cliff that is happening as well. So with insurers leaving premiums on the table, really, why haven't they attacked this problem before? Why now?
I think it's structure. I mean, insurance is just slow moving, right? So the way it changes, it happens on a timeline that is much slower than other industries. So I think back in like the 50s, there was a lot of big catastrophic losses on large, complex risks. Insurance companies started to say, hey, we probably should have some in-house folks who know this space really well and can visit these sites. But the way they approached that is they said, who has already had a career in a factory or an oil rig? So you were always kind of baking in this demographic problem of mass retirements. Insurance companies often call it silver tsunami. They say 40% of these risk engineers and underwriters are retiring in the next 5 years. But what they leave behind them is a trail of decades of documentation that really accurately describes the risk appetite and their expertise. So with Nettle, we're effectively putting all of that into the platform, and we can bring through this new generation who want to be using AI native tools to do that job.
And also augmenting those who are already there. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Maybe a little bit about kind of building Nettle. So, you've gone from idea to signing, multi-year contracts with tier 1 insurers in a very short time. If you think a bit through your pipeline, what does it tell you about the urgency of this problem? We spoke about slow movement, etc. But kind of from the outside, what I can tell, things are actually speeding up quite a bit.
Yeah, I think I've been very surprised, to be honest, about how quickly insurance companies of all types of industries are forward-thinking about AI and are adopting the technology. And I suppose it just reflects what we see in kind of wider society, right? I mean, how quickly do you get used to a new model you're using on a personal basis, or you're not even really that impressed that it can go and read into your files and analyze different types of documents? I think the same thing happens in industries and in enterprise. The challenge typically with selling into these large insurers is people want the technology, but the red tape is very restrictive. There's a lot of hurdles you have to go through. I think what's really helped us is being super clear about, we are solving this specific workflow for you. It's all outcome-based. We help you do it 3 to 5x faster. We're not going in and saying, let's explore where you can use AI across the business.
Yeah. And I think in insurance, we've seen a lot of this kind of building at home versus buying. And I think what is really interesting to see is that companies where you've had initial conversations who said, actually, we're going to build this internally, or we have been building on this for a long period of time, come back and they say, hey, let's chat.
Yeah, I think on that, so, I mean, our team are AI native engineers. We do this kind of day in, day out. And even for us, it is, a lot of work to keep up with the model releases. If your core business is not about software engineering, then it's a very expensive space to get into if you want to build and maintain AI software.
Yeah, and also hearing kind of the comments from the risk engineers that are starting to use Nettle. One guy, I can't remember his name now, but he said the way that I capture data, both the way and both how and what, has really changed. That's real workflow change, not just kind of a report, which is amazing.
Yeah, I think we have the opportunity, and we're very lucky to be in this space to fundamentally change how a trillion-dollar industry behaves. And I think that starts with the users really understanding, hey, AI is now kind of my coworker. What types of evidence should I be giving it from my site visit? Maybe I didn't record any audio notes or videos before, but I know if I do this, it'll save me a couple of hours later.
Yeah, good. Maybe looking a bit in the future, as we investors always like to do. You've said that you want Nettle to become core infrastructure for commercial insurance. If we fast forward, let's say 5 years, what does it actually look like?
Yeah, I think the ultimate goal is speed, right? How can we confidently allow insurers to underwrite really complex commercial risks same day, in the same way that we can get home insurance, pet insurance, car insurance on a personal level instantly? The only way you do that is with good historical data. What Nettle fundamentally does is every risk that appears on your desk or that you've gone to visit on site, Nettle is turning that into thousands of structured data points that you can then cross-reference whenever a new risk comes in. And I think what's interesting, because we're positioning ourselves as that bridge into the physical world, there's also site visits that happen after a claim occurs. So when you've got data from the point of underwriting, but also the point of claims, you can start to really predict that cause and effect and have a very powerful predictive layer, which allows customers to get the insurance they need instantly.
And that was really part of our investment thesis here, that if you not only you sit on this evidence layer, you can then expand from the on-site risk assessment to the desktop risk assessment and underwriting. And as you were just alluding to on the claims, you also need to go inspect a building if there's a claim. So you're starting to see actually already some of that happening.
Yeah, definitely. We start with that risk engineering team that do the inspections because they're crying out for support and technology. But very quickly, there's recognition inside these companies that this could be useful for other teams in the org as well.
Yeah. When you build a company, it's also about kind of what you need to be really passionate about it. It's something you're going to do for a long period of time. So when would you say is the moment where you will feel, okay, we're really doing, you and Katja, your co-founder, we're really doing what we set out to do?
I think it comes back to this point of we are very fortunate to have the opportunity to shape the industry. I think in the next 3 to 5 years, the fundamental roles inside these insurance companies and the demographics of people that want to work there should shift. You talked about some of our users kind of saying that their workflow themselves are changing. I want to see that on a massive scale. I want to see new people come into this industry excited to use AI because this is one of the most AI-forward things in finance and insurance. So yeah, that demographic shift would be a kind of really good sign for us.
Yeah. Okay, and I think that's already starting to happen for sure. I think we're going to finish with a few quick-fire questions. I haven't prepared you for these ones, so short answers, or feel free to expand. So first, what is the one thing that you would have wished that you had known before you went into your first enterprise sales cycle?
Yeah, I didn't come from a sales background, right? So I always imagined that sales was, a kind of vague skill set that people just had or they didn't, and maybe it comes back to that, similar to underwriting, it's the art and science, right? I think it is much more of a science than I first realized. So I wish I would have gone in and kind of revised essentially how to do sales, how do the best-in-class sellers around the world treat these enterprise sales cycles and treat it very methodically and mathematically. I think we've got into a really good motion with that, but that was a huge learning curve for me.
Yeah. If a risk engineer came from 1995 and saw Netto, what do you think would shock them the most?
Well, a lot of them are from 1995, so you know what? Two things I think are interesting. In the 90s, a lot of these folks who visited sites, whether it's for insurance or maybe for like testing and certification or other on-site jobs like this, they used dictaphones. And that was helpful for them to structure their notes, and then gradually that died away because it actually caused a lot of work to go and turn that into structured data. Nettle is essentially bringing that back. It's quite retro, so that they would quite like that. They would feel quite familiar, I think. So speaking into Nettle, but rather than you going and structuring that, it is taking whatever you've said in your language and breaking it up into useful structured information to complete the job. And then maybe kind of more surprise and shocking for them is, I think that just the level of nuance and accuracy that we can achieve at pace. If we feed in images or video into this platform, it is immediately cross-referencing against industry standards, what they've looked at before, and it feels like you're talking to a deep domain expert. That's always quite surprising.
Yeah. Okay, last one then is, what is one assumption about insurance that you think is about to break?
I think most people who are not from the industry glaze over a bit when you say insurance. And certainly, like, when you speak to people who are in insurance, they never said that there was something they wanted to get into, but they were drawn to it as they kind of get under the curtain and understand this is an amazing industry where it blends real physical world, geopolitical risks with finance, and also with kind of people's livelihoods. Like, I think one of the most amazing things about the insurance industry is that if a typhoon hits the Philippines, that risk is spread around the world, and that is why people are able to get back to their day-to-day lives, because that risk is spread. So I think it's fundamentally a really interesting industry, but it has a reputation of being slow-moving and there's huge barriers to entry. I think it is absolutely ripe for AI disruption. It is the only industry in the world where you don't know your cost of goods sold in advance, because you have to predict the claims that will happen. So I think we're going to see people who are interested in machine learning, artificial intelligence, and LLMs move in and fundamentally change the image of that industry.
Yeah. I think maybe to summarize, we're seeing real AI transformation happening in kind of assessing complex risk, and I think is one of the biggest shifts we're seeing actually there in commercial insurance. But thank you so much, Jack, for joining. Thank you, everyone.